For decades, the assumption held firm across Washington, across NATO headquarters, across defense procurement offices on both sides of the Atlantic, American platforms were the gold standard. The F-35 was the future, and any nation that wanted to be taken seriously in fifth-generation air power would line up, sign the contract, and integrate into a supply chain designed in Virginia and sustained on American terms. They were all utterly incorrect. The lights never turn off at the Rolls-Royce test complex in Derby. The facility operates around the clock, its engineers rotating through shifts in a rhythm as consistent as the turbines they built. But on that particular Tuesday at 3 in the morning, the atmosphere inside the climate chamber carried a different weight. This was not a routine validation cycle. Engineers were preparing to stress test a propulsion system that, if it performed as designed, would quietly redraw the balance of air power in the high Arctic, a region where geography and temperature dictate terms that no briefing slide can soften. The chamber was sealed. The temperature was locked at -52°C, simulating an altitude of 40,000 feet with Arctic wind chill replicated through controlled airflow systems that cost more to install than many frontline fighter aircraft. Mounted on the test stand was a next-generation turbofan carrying documentation marked for the Royal Canadian Air Force. Wired with hundreds of sensors tracking combustion stability, lubricant viscosity, fuel atomization, thermal expansion rates, and structural stress tolerances across a brutal temperature spread. The objective was not incremental improvement, it was proof of reliability where most engines struggle to function at all. When the ignition sequence began, the engine accelerated from a fully cold-soaked state, no preheating, no auxiliary ground equipment, to stable combat thrust in 93 seconds. Read that again, 93 seconds, from inert metal to full operational thrust at -52°C. That number would become the most discussed figure in closed-door briefings from Ottawa to Stockholm, because comparable American alternatives under similar -45-degree testing conditions required an average of 14 minutes to achieve operational readiness, often experiencing thrust degradation of roughly 30% during initial operation while critical systems stabilized. That difference is not cosmetic. It is not theoretical. The test series ran for more than 400 cumulative hours in extreme environment trials, documenting repeatable cold starts, sustained thrust output, and structural durability under rapid temperature transitions. When portions of those results circulated through defense channels, the reaction was less public outrage and more stunned recalibration. Intelligence agencies quietly confirmed that the capability gap between this Canadian-configured platform and its nearest competitor represented the largest Arctic performance disparity recorded in modern fighter aviation. Dear viewers, to understand why that matters, you have to step back from the chamber and examine what this engine represents, not just technically, but industrially and strategically. Rolls-Royce did not embark on this program to fulfill a single contract. The development addressed a long-standing limitation in conventional turbofan design, a trade-off that prioritized high-temperature cruise efficiency while accepting compromises in extreme cold performance. That trade-off made sense for most air forces. It never aligned with Canada's operational reality, where sovereignty patrols over the Northwest Passage demand aircraft that can launch reliably in conditions that ground others. The breakthrough begins with lubricant chemistry, an area rarely discussed outside engineering conferences, yet decisive in sub-zero operations. Traditional aviation lubricants thicken dramatically as temperatures plunge, increasing friction, delaying spool-up times, and placing enormous strain on starter systems. The new formulation developed for this engine maintains stable viscosity down to -60°C, allowing internal components to rotate freely without external heating. That single advance reduces wear, lowers energy demand during ignition, and eliminates one of the primary causes of cold start delays in existing platforms. Fuel behavior posed a parallel challenge. Jet fuel at extreme cold forms wax crystals that restrict flow and compromise atomization, forcing many designs to rely on preheating mechanisms that add complexity, weight, and maintenance demands. Engineers addressed this by redesigning the injection system to optimize spray patterns and droplet size at low temperatures, preventing crystal accumulation without energy-intensive heating cycles, resulting in a lighter, simpler architecture that performs consistently across a broader thermal envelope. Material science advances underpin the entire system. Conventional turbine alloys optimized for high-temperature resilience are vulnerable to microfractures when exposed to sudden thermal shock after prolonged cold soaking, a scenario common in Arctic operations where aircraft sit in sub-zero conditions before rapid ignition. Metallurgists formulated a new alloy composition capable of tolerating temperature swings from -50 to +900 degrees Celsius without structural degradation, durability benefits that extend beyond aviation into energy production and industrial turbine applications. Each of these innovations would have been significant individually. Their integration compounds performance gains in a way that transforms operational timelines entirely. Now consider the tactical reality. Long-range radar detects unidentified aircraft approaching Canadian airspace over the high Arctic. Contrast two timelines, one in which engines require more than 10 minutes to stabilize before takeoff, and another in which 93 seconds generate full thrust. In northern engagements measured in minutes rather than hours, that gap determines who gains altitude advantage first, who locks targeting systems first, who dictates the geometry of interception, especially when paired with long-range air-to-air munitions like the Meteor missile, already integrated on certain European platforms. This is not a performance footnote. This is the definition of Arctic sovereignty made operational. Parallel testing conducted under identical environmental controls included evaluation of the Lockheed Martin F-35, equipped with the F-135 engine. The aircraft remains formidable across many mission profiles, that must be acknowledged, but documented cold start averages of 14 minutes at -45 degrees, coupled with temporary thrust reduction during initial operation and reliance on specialized maintenance tools not readily available at improvised Arctic strips, these underscored a distinct disadvantage in the northern theater, a conclusion reflected in internal assessments, even as public statements carefully emphasized broader performance envelopes. Translation? Officially, the F-35 remains world-class. Quietly, the Arctic calculus had shifted. Integration speed amplified the breakthrough further. Saab had designed the Gripen's airframe with modular architecture intended for future engine evolution, allowing the updated power plant to be incorporated into Canadian production lines with minimal structural modification, approximately 6 weeks to revise assembly procedures, roughly 90 days to qualify the revised aircraft configuration, a timeline that contrasts sharply with the multi-year certification cycles associated with deeply integrated platforms optimized around a single engine specification. And here is where the strategic architecture becomes visible in full. Canada does not approach this procurement as a passive customer. Sweden's Saab has been explicit. 10,000 research and manufacturing jobs could land in Canada if Ottawa adds the Gripen to its military fleet. Saab is prepared to execute that technology transfer and support the domestic industrial build-out. Swedish engineering teams operate in Ontario. British propulsion specialists contribute from Montreal. Canadian aerospace workers absorb expertise from both, creating a continuous two-way exchange of insight. This is not dependency, this is architecture. Arctic operational data flows back to European designers, who refine systems based on real-world performance rather than abstract modeling. When a Canadian pilot identifies a tactical limitation during winter exercises, that feedback reaches designers without waiting for layers of procurement bureaucracy to filter the message. When a Swedish engineer develops an improvement to cold weather resilience, the conversation with a Canadian counterpart who understands the operational stakes begins immediately. The speed of that exchange becomes its own competitive advantage. And what happened next reveals everything about how monopoly procurement erodes strategic agility. Official American reactions acknowledged impressive cold weather capability while reaffirming overall platform superiority, a carefully balanced formulation that avoided any direct claims of Arctic advantage. Separate intelligence analyses reportedly characterized the breakthrough as a generational advance in cold weather propulsion technology, noting that similar research pathways had not been aggressively pursued domestically, in part because procurement structures did not prioritize that niche environment. This is not oversight. This is the structural cost of monopoly supply chains. When one supplier dominates, the incentive to tailor solutions for unique climates weakens, especially when the core customer operates in fundamentally different conditions. The engine validated in extreme cold exists precisely because engineers were motivated by a defined Arctic requirement, and because the partnership structure ensured those requirements carried weight inside the design process. European aerospace research agencies responded swiftly to the Derby results, launching parallel studies into cold weather propulsion improvements, stimulated by proof that long-standing assumptions about performance ceilings in extreme climates were no longer valid, reigniting competitive dynamics within the alliance that had been muted during periods of limited supplier diversity. The 17 identified performance parameters slated for phased improvement over the next 36 months mean the fleet rolling off Canadian assembly lines in Ontario will evolve continuously, integrating fuel efficiency gains and advanced thermal management refinements without disrupting including pilot training or maintenance ecosystems. Today's 93-second cold start could be 60 seconds within 5 years. If a competitor begins development now aiming to match 93 seconds a decade from today, the benchmark will have moved so far forward that parity at an outdated figure offers little practical value. Observers in France and Germany recognized that reality during their evaluations. They understood they were endorsing an accelerating development path, not merely approving a snapshot of current capability. The financial dimension reinforces the strategic one. Patented alloy compositions, advanced fuel injection systems, and proprietary lubricant formulations create diversified income channels across aerospace, energy, and heavy industry sectors, reinforcing Britain's aerospace manufacturing base while illustrating how targeted innovation can erode entrenched market dominance previously sustained by limited competition. For cold climate nations evaluating procurement decisions through the lens of reliability in sub-zero environments, Norway, Finland, Sweden maintaining northern defense responsibilities, Kazakhstan and Mongolia assessing requirements along vast cold borders, the appeal of a platform whose engine has demonstrated verified -52-degree performance is self-evident. Intellectual property protections secure long-term revenue streams for Rolls-Royce through licensing, royalties, and derivative industrial applications. Strategic procurement has become a growth engine. Everything ultimately circles back to that freezing chamber, 3 in the morning, -52 degrees Celsius, an engine igniting from fully cold-soaked metal and reaching stable combat thrust in 93 seconds. That moment is not merely a technical milestone, it reflects a sovereignty-driven strategy that aligned industrial incentives with national requirements, encouraged collaboration over dependency, and produced capabilities tailored to the harshest operational environment on the planet. Arctic sovereignty is not an abstract political slogan. It is a logistical reality defined by persistent patrols over the Northwest Passage, remote forward operating locations, and winter temperatures that regularly plunge into ranges where many Allied aircraft face degraded readiness. By fielding an engine validated across 400 hours of extreme trials, the Royal Canadian Air Force secures year-round operational certainty, eliminating the assumption that winter conditions create predictable surveillance gaps exploitable by foreign vessels or probing aircraft. And as pilots operate from austere Arctic strips in live conditions, mastering rapid cold starts, thermal transition management, navigation in magnetic anomaly zones, they accumulate institutional knowledge no simulator can replicate. That human expertise compounds alongside technological capital, creating a durable advantage that cannot be measured only by thrust ratings or cold start times. Retired pilots move into defense contractors, research institutions, and advisory boards, carrying hard-earned operational lessons into the next generation of systems. This is not a temporary edge. It is a strategic inheritance being built in real time. Canada does not calculate from weakness. Canada does not wait for others to define the terms of its own sovereignty. Canada doesn't just watch history unfold in the Arctic. Canada shapes it. What do you think about all this? Tell us in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.